Hello Dodo crew and welcome back for another video on ARK Ascended. In this video I go over the top 10 creatures that have become useless over the years and which in my opinion need a TLC. Grab a bottle of water and let's get straight into it. The addition of the Plesiosaurus on June 30, 2015 makes it one of the oldest creatures you can find in the game. And the Plesiosaurus sucks. It is probably the most boring creature you can tame if you're building underwater. Almost every other creature that lives in the depths of the ocean is faster, deals more damage, has better effects, can tank better and is easier or at least similar difficult to tame. In addition, the design of the Plesio is simply outdated and boring compared to many other creatures you can find on the Ark. There is actually not a single situation where I would choose a Plesio over a Mosa, Basi or Tuso. The damage a Plesio does is simply far too low, while at the same time it can withstand significantly less than a Mosa or Basi. So in my opinion, what would the TLC for the Plesio look like? Since the Plesio already spawns in pairs, it should for sure get a pack bonus or maybe its own mechanic where it gets stronger when its spawn partner fights alongside it. In addition, a buff similar to the Megatherium would be perfect, where the Plesiosaurus kills small fish and then gets a damage and resistance buff. Finally, the Plesio needs a visual overhaul, and that's it. On a side note, as of I'm editing this, I'm at about 3k subs. If you could sub to help me reaching my goal of 10k subs by the end of the year, I would greatly appreciate it. In 9th place, we got the Sabertooth. Similar to the Plesiosaurus, the Sabertooth is a pretty old creature that has not received any significant update since its release in 2015. Once the best hide farmer since Scorched Earth and the Chainsaw, it is the best dust collector. Nobody, really nobody, uses the Sabertooth in 2025. The only time you will encounter Sabertooths in PvP is when a beach bob still hasn't understood that you shouldn't simply tame all creatures that run around your fetch base. The problem the Sabertooth has is that it cannot do anything well, and by the time you need hide, you already have Ovis and a Chainsaw. The Sabertooth doesn't do much damage, so it cannot be used to defend your base, it does not have any abilities except jumping, and he looks simply boring. If someone defends the base on a Sabertooth, then I will abort the raid, because then I know for sure that there is really nothing to get, and I just feel sorry for the guy. So what could the TLC for the Sabertooth look like? First of all, he needs to get a buff. Bleeding damage is already taken, but an ability like armor penetration or true damage would fit the Sabertooth's design perfectly. Imagine you soak with your stego and still get unreduced hit from a guy on a Sabertooth. This would compensate for the overall low damage a Sabertooth does and immediately makes it so much stronger in PvP. The armor penetration would have to match the design. For example, the Sabertooth would have to be made a little bigger, its teeth would have to look a little more penetrating, and with just a few small changes, it would have a use in PvP again, and would be a great tame to defend your base and shred tanks. This is my personal top 10, and I will mainly focus on tames, which are pretty much useless in PvP, because they are simply too weak to compete with other creatures in the same niche. The Scorpion takes 8th place. It was added to the game in 2015 and since then has never been nerfed or improved once, which makes him one of the worst creatures in the entire game. This creature is straight up useless. The only use the Scorpion has is as cementing paste in your structures. There is not a single reason to tame a Scorpion, whether in PvE or PvP. I mean, what are you supposed to do with it? It is slow, can take any damage, has no meaningful ability. Yeah, well, you will say, Frodo, it can trank stuff. Yeah, it is useless. And it doesn't deal any damage either. Which is pretty sad. In my eyes, the Scorpion is a missed opportunity. It had so much potential to be a really cool and useful creature. Either as a mount to stun other creatures or with a few new abilities, like turning arrows into trank arrows in its inventory or the ability to passively produce narcotics. It would be so easy for wildcard, and the Scorpion would be a must tame in every run, and we wouldn't have to stand around in our bases for hours to craft trank arrows. What's also quite versatile are the PCs from Hightech, my first official partner. Hightech builds PCs exactly for people like you, me, and all the other gamers. From PCs over laptops to headsets, you can find pretty much everything in their online shop, and with the code DODO5 you can get an additional 5% discount on your order. You can find the link to their website in the video description, check out their stuff, and now let's continue with the video. The Onyx takes my 7th place. This rabbit spreading terror of the caves isn't that bad in PvE, but it is absolutely useless in PvP. Not only are they a pain to tame, they are also insanely useless when playing PvP despite their true damage. At most, you could use them in caves and set them to aggressive so that they can attack enemies who want to run into your cave. But let's be honest, one hit with a rocket and the Onyx are gone. They already do a good amount of damage thanks to their armor penetration, which makes them really good against players. They just can't take a hit and are therefore useless. Onyx should at least get the ability to sit on walls in caves and camouflage themselves, so that they can simply not be spotted. Then, Onyx also need either an ability like lifesteal. I mean, this is a bet, it is basically a vampire. Why not give it some vampire abilities? Or some ability to spread a disease among the attackers, which for example reduces the maximum life of creatures and players, or give a permanent debuff. There is no denying it, the Pachyrhinosaurus deserves the 6th place. This creature is simply useless. Give me one sane reason to tame this creature and I will raid someone with a pack of Pachys. This creature has literally no health, does absolutely no damage, its knockout ability is simply terrible and there is no reason to tame one. Which is a bit of a shame, because this creature could be really useful. You would just have to find a way to use it to knock out other creatures and for example give it the ability to break creatures' armor and give them a temporary debuff so that other creatures take more damage after being charged by a Pachy. The Araneo is a mess and it's hard to know where to start. It's not just weak, it's completely useless in PvP and its design feels like one big flaw, that's why it's my number 5. Firstly, let's be honest, nobody rides an Araneo by choice. If you do, you'll probably get laughed at because you just look ridiculous sitting on an Araneo. And what's worse, it's a spider that can't even climb walls. How can that even make sense? The first thing that needs to change is its movement. It should be able to climb walls like a rock drake or a megalania. A true spider mount should be able to ambush from above, not just stumble around like an oversized cockroach. And then there's the web. At the moment, it's completely garbage. It should be at least as useful as a baller or a net gun, actually catching creatures instead of just slowing them down for a second. The poison should also get a serious buff, like stacking damage or even paralyzing poison that temporarily slows down enemies, attacks or even stuns them completely. A really cool addition would be an Araneo Queen that can occasionally lay eggs and spawn smaller spider minions that swarm around enemies and slow them down, similar to bee drones. This would make it so much more useful in both PvE and PvP. Starting as a non-tameable creature, the Titan Boa has already received 1 or 2 updates before we could finally tame and use it. But why in God's name would you tame it? It just doesn't make sense. The boa is straight up useless and the only reason Wildcard made it tameable is because getting boa eggs at the time was even worse than the creature itself. But since the kibble rework, you no longer need the eggs, so why should you still tame this creature? First of all, the Titan Boa should either get an ability to passively produce narcotics in the inventory. Yes, I can hear you screaming, that's a boa, they don't produce poison, and why the hell do you get knocked out every goddamn time that thing bites me? Exactly, because in ARK they produce poison. In addition, it should get the ability to grab creatures like stegos and trikes, pull them around, deal damage over time to the creature, holding them and then swallow them like a sieve. Before we go any further, leave me a like and a comment. This not only makes me happy, but also boosts the algorithm. Third place goes to the Dilophosaurus. Don't get me wrong, the Dillo is a real pain in the early game, especially if you're a beach bob and playing the game for the first time. But apart from that, Dillos are simply useless. Sure, everyone tames one when they start the game for the first time, but for real, how many people tame the Dillo after playing more than 10 hours? That's right, nobody. The most annoying thing about Dillos is that they are basically everywhere and that their spit attack can break your armor at the worst possible moments. And that would be the right way to make Dillos better in PvP. You would just have to rework the spit attack and either improve the current attack or add a new attack, which either apply armor reduction or torpor. The second place, the Carbonemis, has basically already got its TLC with the Archelon. The Archelon is almost everything the Carbo will never be. It's a cool creature that can actually be used for something other than tanking turrets. The mechanic around algae and sushi makes sense and is actually quite useful, even if most people don't use it. But what could really make the Carbonemis better? I mean, the thing is a huge turtle and cannot retreat into its shell. Similar to the Acatina, the Carbo should simply be able to temporarily enter its shell and then get additional damage resistance. It shouldn't be able to move during that time, but it would actually be good at the one thing it's meant for: soaking turrets. Before we get into my number 1, here are a few honorable mentions, starting with all the creatures that live underwater. I mean, since most of the game takes place on the surface, okay, but most of the creatures like megalodons are just outdated and not really useful anymore. A lot of creatures that have been in the game since the beginning, like the Metrodons or the bad trike, are just old, feel outdated compared to newer creatures like the Pyromane, and should just be overhauled. First place goes to the Giganotosaurus. Don't get me wrong, the culture is cool and for sure worth taming, but when I think about how scary the Giga was when it first came to play, I mean, that thing could wipe out entire bases by itself, and then look how bad it is now. It's just a disgrace now. Sure, it's still pretty scary, but compared to the culture, the Giga just doesn't have any good abilities. Even worse, instead of good abilities, the Giga still has the debuff that it attacks allied creatures when it takes too much damage. It would be much better if the Giga got an Enrage where it does extra damage to enemies. In my opinion, that would be enough for the Giga to regain its place at the top of the food chain. I hope you liked this video, and I'm thrilled to read if this video has helped you. Hit the like button, leave a comment below for the algorithm, and consider subbing to the channel. Alright, Frodo.